It's time for some Week 11 trade targets. Stick around all the way to the end because we're going to be talking about 8 different players that you should be trading for right now. I'm Alfredo Brown. I am with the awesome Dave Kluge. Before we go any further, if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that like button, click the bell to subscribe to all the great football guys content we have here on YouTube, and drop your questions in the comments below. We're going to get back to every single one of them talking about your trades for your team and your league. All right, let's hop into these trade targets. All right, Dave, let's hop into the first trade target you have here, and it's Miami Dolphins running back Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, it looks as if it is pretty apparent that Jeff Wilson Jr. has taken over as the lead back for the Miami Dolphins. So what you're looking at is a lead back on an explosive offense. I don't know what there is not to like about this situation. Going forward, you can probably slot him in as a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, wherever you want to fit him in there. But really, let me just point out these numbers really quickly. Jeff Wilson Jr. and Raheem Mostert have played 2 games together now in Miami since week 9. And Jeff Wilson Jr. has 34 touches to Raheem Mostert's 23. Yards per attempt, Jeff Wilson Jr. is averaging 6.5 to Raheem Mostert's 5.4. Yards after contact per attempt, 2.8 to 1.8. Yards per catch, 9 to 5.5. Breakaway runs, 3 to 1. And red zone touches, most importantly, 8 to 4. Jeff Wilson Jr. is dominating this backfield right now, doing a fantastic job. He's 4 years younger. He's got the familiarity with the offense and should be looked at as a low-end RB1 going forward. Now, Alfredo, let's hear about your guy, New Orleans Saints receiver Chris Olave.
Yeah, so Chris Olave, man, he has already shown he's one of the best route runners in the league. If you follow Matt Harmon on Twitter and you take a look at the awesome work he does with reception perception, Chris Olave's reception perception chart looks like an undecorated Christmas tree. It's just all green everywhere, no other colors. It's just green in every single direction. He's leading the NFL in air yards per game, so his ceiling remains really high. And I know a lot of people like to call that, the Jameis Winston prayer yards, but Jameis has not been starting for the Saints for quite a while. So, to have this kind of success with Andy Dalton, to have this thrust upon him as a rookie, it's been pretty impressive for Chris Olave. And he's been averaging over 8 targets per game this season, which you don't really find that volume all that often with many players, let alone a rookie who really has established himself as the top receiver on his team. And the team also looks like they might be switching away from Andy Dalton, going back to Jameis Winston. A lot of that kind of depends on what the medical staff says, but Andy Dalton, you look back at what he's done, it's been crazy that Chris Olave has been so good in spite of Andy Dalton. Dalton's had 6 interceptions over the last 4 games. He's stalling out these offensive drives. So what this does is it not only by having these shortened drives, you miss out on more targets, more receptions, scoring opportunities. Like it's basic give and take here. When the ball's getting turned over, you don't have good things happening for your offense. And so the switch back to Jameis Winston could absolutely be huge for Chris Olave, and I love him as a buy low candidate after a bad game last week. All right, let's take a quick second here. I want to let everybody know we have an awesome giveaway right now, a signed Javonte Williams football. That's right, autographed by the Denver Broncos running back himself. All you have to do to win this awesome piece of memorabilia is just leave a 5-star review for this show on Apple Podcast. Take a screenshot of that, send it to me on Twitter, just slide in my DMs, showing me your 5-star review of the show. And guess what? You are automatically entered to win the Javonte Williams signed football. All right, Dave, bring us up to our next trade target that you really like. It's Kadarius Toney.
Yeah, and I don't think this one is all that sneaky. I mean, we know what Kadarius Toney is. He is a former first-round pick with game-breaking ability. We saw it in very small doses last year with the Giants. Every time this guy gets the ball in his hand, it is a big play waiting to happen. When it comes to evaded tackles, missed tackle rate, juke rate, all of those fun metrics, he is always atop the list. And now the Kansas City Chiefs made a very intentional trade to bring him in right before the trade deadline. What I'm envisioning for Kadarius Toney is sort of the role that was vacated by Tyreek Hill. And a lot of people have this conception that Tyreek Hill is just a downfield burner, but he was playing that wide back role last year, sort of similar to a Deebo Samuel Light, and that is so perfect for what Kadarius Toney brings to the table. Now, last week, we only saw him play 44% of the snaps, but he led the team with 3.35 yards per route run. He also led the team in yards per reception and yards per carry, and we also saw that nifty little touchdown where he was able to toe tap his way down the sidelines. Kadarius Toney is a game-breaking talent on an explosive offense. We don't need to overthink this one. Go out and trade for Kadarius Toney. All right, Alfredo, let's hear why you are targeting David Montgomery in trades.
I'm actually surprised. Like this was not your guy because you're a Bears fan. You got a Bears helmet over your shoulder there, but David Montgomery, listen, this is a buy low if I've ever it's weird. It's kind of a statistical buy low, but like a mental buy high, I guess. He's had a combined 10 PPR points over the last 2 weeks. So statistically, yeah, not that great. But let's kind of take a look at what's going on around him. Obviously, we see Khalil Herbert has been placed on IR. He will be out for at least the next 4 games. And after Khalil Herbert went down, Montgomery took every single snap at the running back position. So while that might not be the same, the case every single week, that is something to take note of, right? Like they're not just going to throw in Tristan Ebner in there into the Khalil Herbert role. Different players, different timings here in the season. David Montgomery could be in for a big time workload, and he'd been hovering around a 65% snap share, and I think we could see that probably go up, probably in that 75 to maybe even 80 range, depending on what the flow of the game here. Remember, David Montgomery is in the last year of his contract. The Bears don't really have a need to preserve him. If they want to control the pace of these games, that defense hasn't really been that great. So if they want to control the pace of these games, they can just keep running David Montgomery into the ground, unless, of course, Justin Fields is going to keep ripping off 75-yard runs every week, and that kind of, that defeats the purpose of it. But the Bears do have the 8th easiest remaining strength of schedule for fantasy running backs. I think this is a really nice kind of sneaky buy right now at this time, because I think that the David Montgomery manager in your league has been so hurt by him all year, whether it was being injured or not playing well or mixing in touches with Khalil Herbert. They'll just be like, fine, I don't want him on my team anymore. I want to get rid of this guy. And this is actually a great time to do it. He's got an easy matchup this week against Atlanta, and then championship week going up against Detroit, another team that is poor against fantasy running backs. I really like the potential for David Montgomery going forward for this year on your fantasy rosters. It looks like we have another Bear, Chicago Bear, here on the list. Dave, I feel like you kind of like stole the show sheet from me. You started just putting in a bunch of your favorite players, but here we are. We're going through our trade target list, and Cole Kmet, tight end for the Chicago Bears, is on here. Talk to me about why Cole Kmet is a trade target for you, Dave.
Well, when you've got a very bad defense and an explosive offense, that usually spells pretty good for fantasy points. And right now, looking at Cole Kmet, he has a 22% target share and 5 touchdowns just over the last 3 weeks. Now, you probably know the number by now, but through his first 2.5 years, his touchdown rate was just historically improbably terrible. He had 155 targets and just 2 touchdowns over those 2.5 years. And this is just a classic case of positive regression. Throughout this entire season, he's actually pulled 7 red zone targets, which doesn't sound like a ton, but that's 8th among all fantasy tight ends. The Bears offense has scored 29 points in 4 straight weeks. Like you alluded to when talking about David Montgomery, the defense has been terrible. They've shifted all of their assets off the defensive side of the ball, trading away Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, and Roquan Smith, and are investing in the offense. And now with Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz expected to miss a lot of time in a very crucial point of the fantasy football season, Cole Kmet is a guy that you should go out and try to trade for, and is a great pivot to fill in your tight end 1 slot. All right, Alfredo, let's talk about why you are targeting Los Angeles Chargers Joshua Palmer.
Yeah, so this is really interesting, man. Like to me, this is almost kind of like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? That doesn't quite work for fantasy football, but hear me out when I talk to you about this. Okay, so Joshua Palmer, he's the guy that all year I've kind of called him the wide receiver handcuff to have, and it's proven to be that that's the case with Joshua Palmer. Okay, Mike Williams has not been playing. Keenan Allen has not been playing. Joshua Palmer, well, not every single week has he been, the star wide receiver, but he's filled in pretty admirably. And last week in specific, he had a 100% route participation. And even for the top guys, you don't see that all that often. The 23% target share was nice. And I know that you didn't see all the great fantasy numbers that maybe you wanted to see, but all these peripheral numbers, so to speak, looked pretty good. He had over 50% of the team's air yards. So he's not just some dink and dunk guy. He's a player that has that versatility. Play outside, play inside, take some shots downfield, get him on some quick screens, get him on some underneath routes. And I think that versatility is going to lend to some good productivity for Joshua Palmer and the Chargers. He's averaged 10 targets per game over his last 3 appearances. So it's not like he's had like a one-off game. It's not like, a Gabe Davis type or even like Christian Watson, where it's like, okay, he went and had a 4 touchdown, 3 touchdown game. This has been consistent. The volume has been there, and he's just absolutely been the guy for the Chargers while Allen and Williams have been out. And I get that those guys are returning soon, but they have the kind of injuries that are lingering injuries. Okay, they're lingerers, man. Like they stay there. High ankle sprain and hamstrings. Those kind of soft tissue injuries, they come back. They could limit these guys, put them on a snap count, and even if they're not on a snap count, it could totally affect their performance. We saw Jerry Jeudy come back from a high ankle sprain last year, and he did not look good game after game after game. It took a while for him to get back to full speed and really be the player that we have seen him become this year. And Josh Palmer, I think regardless of how these guys come back, he's carved out a role in this offense at this point to be a reliable target for Justin Herbert. And now more than ever, with this injury to Gerald Everett, that's another pass catcher that comes off the field. So one way or another, I think that we're going to see Joshua Palmer as one of the probably top 3 targets for Justin Herbert continuing as the season goes on, as we get deeper and closer to the playoffs. And listen, Chargers have the 9th easiest remaining strength of schedule for fantasy wide receivers. So one way or another, I think that Joshua Palmer deserves to be not only just on a fantasy roster, but somewhere near your starting lineup, whether that's your wide receiver 2, 3 flex area, depending on these matchups. If he has a schedule that good, I want Joshua Palmer on my team. All right, let's get to our last trade target here, and it is Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back Rachaad White. Dave, tell me why you love Rachaad White, because personally, I'm not sold. So tell me why you love him.
And I spent all offseason touting Leonard Fournette. He is one of my favorite players in the league, but we got to kind of play with what we're seeing right now. And it looks like Rachaad White is taking over this backfield. Maybe not completely, but enough that it warrants going out and trying to get him on your fantasy team. He played a season high 64% of his snaps last week, and we saw him rush for 22 rushes, 105 yards. He looked really good. We probably all saw that highlight of him just tossing a defender with a filthy stiff arm. The dude's got a lot of talent. And right now, Leonard Fournette's got a banged up hip. And White saw 77% of the snaps and 5 of 5 red zone targets after Fournette was knocked out. So I'm not saying that Fournette's going to miss any time, but if he does, the contingent value is there where Rachaad White can play as an every down back, and the coaching staff has that faith in him. As a rookie, he came into the league with an 80th percentile speed and burst score, so he's got a lot of juice that an older Leonard Fournette probably doesn't hold on to anymore. And Fournette, when healthy, isn't going to disappear. He is great at what he does as a pass blocker. He brings an edge to this offense, and let's just address the elephant in the room here. The Bucs are paying him a lot of money. They're not going to bench him. But in Rachaad White's final year in college, he had 3.9 receptions per game. So he profiles as a very strong pass catcher, which could really raise that ceiling, especially in PPR leagues. And the Bucs offense now has won 2 straight. They've scored 4 touchdowns over the last couple of weeks. Chris Godwin is healthy. Julio Jones is healthy. It looks like the team is finally starting to mesh a little bit and look like the Bucs team that we've seen for the last few years. Like I said, he has huge contingent upside, but he has shown enough that even if Leonard Fournette is healthy, he could work his way into some RB2 and flex consideration every single week.
That's it for us. We'll talk to you next Monday with Dr. Vig and giving you our Week 12 waiver wire and injury analysis episode. For myself, for my co-host today, Dave Kluge, adios.